So the asset allocation targets that you set up when you produce a policy portfolio are critical to the management of an endowment or the management of a portfolio for an individual or a pension plan or whatever investor that you're talking about. And if you set up the targets and then you don't pay attention to them, you fail. So once you've established the targets, the way that you can maintain the exposures that you've signed up for is to be disciplined about rebalancing. So if the markets take you away from your target because they've performed relatively well, then you need to sell what's performed relatively well. And if the markets take you away from the target because the asset has performed relatively poorly, then you need to add to that relatively poorly performing asset to get back to target. And that rebalancing is absolutely, I think, critical to effective portfolio management. But the reality is that most investors do the opposite. Right? When an asset has gone up, they get more confidence. Well, they sell cheap. When an asset's gone down, they lose confidence and sell. And when an asset's gone up, they gain confidence and buy more. Yes. And you can look at studies of the mutual fund industry in the United States where they compare the returns on a time-weighted basis, which are just the returns that you'd get if you looked at what the portfolio did year in, year out, and and compare those returns to what the portfolio would have produced on a dollar-weighted basis, which takes into account how much money is in the fund at any point in time. And in the US mutual fund industry, dollar-weighted returns are consistently below time-weighted returns, which means investors put money in after good performance and took money out after poor performance, which means they're buying high and selling low, and that's a terrible way to make money, right? Impossible. But if you rebalance, you're doing the opposite. You're buying what's gone down or what's performed relatively poorly and selling what's gone up or performed relatively well, and there you're buying low and selling high, which is a much better way to generate returns. So that goes to the question of whether you have the right policy targets in the first instance, right? So if your policy target for, let's say, Brazilian equities is 25% of the portfolio, and then the equities perform relatively well, and all of a sudden they're 28% of the portfolio, and you say, well, I should keep the 28. Well, then you should have had 28 as your target in the first place, right? But when you came up with the targets and you concluded that 25 was the right number, and now it's at 28, you've got a different portfolio from what it was that you signed up for in the first place. But it's, I know it's not a mathematical or analytical argument that you're making. What you're making is an emotional argument, and when it's gone up from 25 to 28, then you feel good about it and you want to keep it and you want more.
We do like you do.
But you need to combat your emotions when you're managing assets.